Everything changed when my dad was murdered, and I lost him. I lost that person that was my anchor, and there was so much around his death that my life completely flipped upside down. I was
Yeah.
no longer the normal teenage.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, my custom is to welcome our guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things. Very expensive time. 24 hours has been offered to every man and woman. What we do with that time will tell volumes about you. The other is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator. It created Susan, and so it gave her some things that it deposited inside. And we want access to that. And that's her wisdom, her knowledge, and her insights and so forth. And to be able to give us access, she has to become vulnerable. And we want to honor her and thank her for allowing us to see who she is from this vantage point. Susan, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you here. As I said, I don't believe you just show up. I believe we all have our assignments, and your assignment for this hour is to be here so that that individual that needs your wisdom have access to you. And the question that I always ask on the front is based on that latter part of our position that we occupy when we walk through the journey, and that is a servant. And my question to you, Susan, is how do you serve men?
Well, I think that I serve mankind just by utilizing what I've learned in life and helping people to kind of see that and self discover that for themselves, their own journey and their own recognizing that it is a journey and that it is their journey and that they're not alone. And so I feel like that is a really important piece is that they don't feel alone.
Yeah, that's a very important because most people think that they're suffering alone. And many of them, we have been programmed not to share and not to talk and so forth. And so we have to learn to shed all of those things in order to become healed. One of the first spaces that you and I visit, Susan, when we land on this planet, besides in the hospital, if those are born in the hospital and now they're midwives and all those type stuff. But the very first space that we hang out for a couple of years, 16, 18, whatever years, is that family. And as we are moving through life, we visit all these stations that are programmers. The family is the first. In this particular area, we're going to learn communication skills. We're going to learn about belief. We're going to start developing our belief there. We're going to start our behavior right there. Our mindsets and all these things that will affect our perception and all these things are beginning to give birth there. Trauma also is born there. What was your family unit like?
My family unit, well, my dad was one of those men that was very present. When he spoke to you, he made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. And it didn't
Right.
matter like if it was your dad, if he was your dad or your husband or people he worked with, people he trained, he was the same person with every single one of them. He never his just way of being never shifted. He was always the same authentic person. My mom, on the other hand, and it has taken me many, 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 many years to unpack this, but I grew up with a narcissistic mother who was very she would make me feel like I was not good enough. I always felt like I always had to prove something to her, um, to be quantified as good enough. And I don't know if it was because I can't speak for her, obviously, but I don't know if it was a jealousy of the relationship I had with my dad or what that drove her to some of her behaviors towards me. I grew up in an abusive situation with her. It all occurred when dad was away.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And as I got older, then he started to see it and he started to step in and he was my voice of reason as I got into my teenage years. Granted, moms and daughters don't get along periodically. Um, but our dynamic was always very, I would say it was toxic. And I tried for many, many years just to be what she needed me to be. And that was hard. But then I had my dad on the other side who was, who'd listen intently to me and give me advice and not judge me. And that was a lot of the things that I got from my mom was the judgment. So he tried to counterbalance that for me as a parent. And I'm grateful for that. But it did spark some not habits, but some traits in me that took many years to undo. And so I struggled a bit with that after my dad died. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What what a classroom
Yeah.
to be in.
Yeah.
You have a narcissistic um, individual, and then you have an authentic individual. That is an oxymoron, if you will. And here it is, you are in the midst of this classroom with both of these because a narcissistic individual is all about chaos. That's all they know. Everything they do, their mind is chaotic. An authentic individual is more real than anything else. And
Yeah.
everyone is called to be this authentic individual. And that's what the journey is about, to be that. And the narcissist is the total antithesis of the. And so what a classroom for a young individual to be. And here you are. Wow, what is your communication skills dealing with people? Because again, I'm familiar with the destructiveness of a narcissist. And I'm actually in the midst right now, and I haven't mentioned this is, I'm in the midst of writing a book about that topic and dealing with narcissism and so forth and what it is and so forth. So it's really interesting that we're here. So talk to me as to how did this young individual, because she has to find a way to survive now. What was your
Yeah.
survival skill that you initiated in order to manage your life?
People pleasing. I would mold myself to what, even as a young lady, even as a teenage girl, I would mold myself into the person that I needed to be with a certain group of people. I would I would clean the house. I would make meals. I would do anything that I felt that would make my mom love me more. It was exhausting, I gotta tell you.
Yeah,
But
it usually is.
I also there was a little bit of a rebellion side to me as well, where, she would tell me to clean my room and I would take all my stuff and stuff it under my bed or in my closet or something. And I knew when she found it, I was going to be in big trouble. But there was part of me that was just like, I don't care. And I was like, I don't care, whatever. So it was the people pleasing thing. That's a part of narcissistic abusive behavior is you are running around trying to do everything to please that person. And for many years, I had this like fantasy that if I did this, my mom would wake up one day and just love me wholeheartedly, right? Just no judgment. She'd understand the way I felt. She'd be empathetic to my situation. She would, whatever. And, she'd turn into some Hallmark holiday mother. And it never happened. So I struggled with that in that just trying to be someone that would make my mom proud, like deep down proud, not I'm going to show you that I'm proud, but underneath there's something else. Right. So like compliments and things like that were always backhanded.
That's the way the narcissists move. And so
Yeah.
here's this girl. I mean, you're in a master class, man, from a young individual being molded by these two powerful images, if you will, from dad and from mom. I assume that you spend more time with mom, um, and you having to try to please her because that is something that never is going to happen. And I know you're going to testify that that is never going to happen. No matter what you do, you spin backwards and land on your fingers. Doesn't matter. So, um, as you're growing and you're becoming an older individual, an older young woman, and you're looking towards college to move away from mom and dad, if you will, to become your independent individual from them, you have this major crossroad: school, college, or not. Which did you pick, and why did you pick what you did?
Well, everything changed when my dad was murdered, and I lost him. I lost that person that was my anchor, and there was so much around his death that my life completely flipped upside down. I was no longer the normal teenage girl. My dad's death was highly visible in the media. And because he was a police officer, he was a detective, and he was murdered picking up my 6-year-old brother from school. So I did have a sibling in this mix, and he saved his life, thank God. But I, unfortunately, my mom and I, we went to where he was murdered and witnessed his body in the aftermath. And because of that, I got thrown into, deep depression. I was sent away that night. My mom sent me with a neighbor after witnessing my dad. And be it that that night was very chaotic, there was a lot going on. And I wanted, as soon as I heard the words that he was gone, even though I saw him, I was not processing that. My mom sent me with, she came in and from the office I was sitting at after she had talked to some detectives, and she came in and she said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." And in that moment, I thought to myself, I know that when I heard this news, I wanted to run out of there and run as far as I could. But there was a part of me, the daughter, the child, even though I was 17 years old, that wanted to be with my family unit. I needed to be with my brother and I needed to be with my mother. And even at that point, I didn't even know if my brother was hurt. I had no idea where he was. And I didn't get that, And so in that moment and having to go to the neighbor's house and navigate all of these feelings by myself, I feel like, that started or continued that pattern of not being important and having to figure out things myself, having to navigate all of this myself. And I was the one that had to break it to my boyfriend at the time. I had been dating a young man for 3 months, and I had to break the news to him because the neighbor had called him at work and he came to pick me up to take me to the hospital wherever my dad was. So she didn't give him any information. So having to tell someone else what happened was traumatic in itself. Unbeknownst to me, we were also targets. This was a targeted assassination of my dad for testifying. And so my entire world, my entire neighborhood was filled with police officers. It took them 6 days to find the guys that were involved in the planning and the murder. And so those police officers were there for 6 days, front yard, backyard, helicopters. I had bodyguards. So you can see that my life changed overnight from being a normal teenager, having normal teenage things. It was Halloween that night. I wanted to go to a party, and I was cleaning the house frantically that day just so that I can schmooze my parents into letting me go, 'cause it was a school night, and then all of this happened. So I didn't get that. And I had to figure things out on my own because once that happened, clearly my mom had a lot of responsibilities. both just logistics because the funeral and all the things that go on with that, financial things that she had to deal with. And she kind of turtled into herself and only dealt with that stuff and kind of pushed me aside. Even the media took 2 days to figure out he had a teenage daughter. So all of these things made me feel like I was not important anymore in this scenario. And it was very frustrating for me because I was like, I lost my dad. Like
Yeah.
I lost my security. I lost my best friend. I lost the man who was the voice of reason for me. And now I have to navigate this relationship with my mother without a buffer. And I didn't know how I was going to do that either. So back then, I was living in a fog. I had mental issues. I had PTSD without knowing it. So I had the deep depression, the suicidal ideation. I didn't know what that was. There was no talk of mental health in the middle 80s, in the mid 80s. There were no resources for kids either. And there definitely wasn't a whole lot known about PTSD. In fact, back then it was called shell shock because it was attributed to anyone who had gone to war. But I had all of those things that happened, and I was a kid, so I was too afraid to verbalize what was going on inside of me because I thought they would just throw me in a loony bin and call it a day. So I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything to my mother. She didn't ask. So anything that I did, it was a matter of if you pushed me in a direction, that's the direction I would go. There was no fight back. There was no advocacy. There was no nothing. And that was really hard for me. But at the same time, it was just functioning at that point.
Yeah.
When all of that happened and afterwards and everything calmed down, LAPD decided that that was time for us to go to therapy and told my mom so. And I didn't know anything about therapy. I thought if you went to a therapist, you were crazy. I mean, that was
Yeah.
my kid mentality. I didn't know. But when my mom Fallen told me that I was going to therapy, I was like, "Okay, I'll go." And I went and I met with this gentleman, and in hindsight, this man did not wanna dip his toes in the weeds with me. He was not educated enough. I think he was afraid and intimidated and did not wanna go down that road, so he really kept all of our sessions very general. It was a lot about my relationship with my mom. He was the one that made it clear to me that her behavior was abusive. I did not know that. And my relationship with my brother. Now he was 6, so our relationship was different. My boyfriend in school, that's it. And every week
Wow.
as I was going through all this turmoil, I would go to these sessions thinking, oh my gosh, today's going to be the day. He's going to say something. He's going to ask me something. He's going to do something to help me feel better. And it didn't happen.
How long were you there in therapy with this gentleman?
1 year.
1 year. So 1 year and no help whatsoever. No mention of anything, no deepness, just there spending time and just wasting time basically for a year.
Pretty
When you
much.
came out of that, Susan, and you stopped, if you will, therapy, what began to happen to you at that moment?
Well, he told me after a year, he said, Susan, you're a well rounded young lady. You're going to be fine for the rest of your life. And I don't need to see you anymore. And I walked out of there and my mindset was, okay, I'm nuts. I'm crazy. I've cracked. And even a professional can't help me. So I'm going to have to figure this out on my own. And what I ended up doing is not a healthy one, but it was the only way that I could survive at the moment, which was to create an emotional mask. And what I did was I took what other people said about me. So, for instance, someone would say, oh, Susan, you're so brave. You're so strong. I would put that on my emotional mask, and that's what people saw. People saw this strong, brave young lady. And inside, I was in fight or flight. and freeze and didn't know how to navigate any of that, didn't know how to deal with any of that. So I just hid and I did what people thought I should do.
You're 18, 19 years old going through all this by
Mhm.
yourself. How in the
Yeah.
world did you how did you manage it?
I have no
You're a
idea, to
grown
be
woman.
honest. I have no idea. I think I went from high school, I graduated high school and I went straight into trade school. And my mind was not capable.
What trade did you study?
Initially, I wanted to be a designer. I wanted to be a fashion designer.
Okay.
And I went to the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandise in California and just my mind wasn't right. I wasn't all there. And I thought that if I just dove right back into school, that it would take my mind off of everything and and I would stop grieving and I would stop feeling the way I was and I'd have something to occupy my brain that was different, right? And the problem was is that it didn't. And because it's not linear. So I struggled and I didn't last in school. I quit after 8 months. And then I felt lost and I didn't know what to do. And so I just got various jobs. And I moved in with the boyfriend after having a bad situation with a roommate. When I moved out at 18. It was either me or her at that point, and it had gotten pretty bad. And I finally had it and I left. And I felt super guilty for leaving my brother behind. But I had to do what was best for me at that time, and I did recognize that, and I moved away and moved to my own apartment.
So here you are, this young woman. And I tell people, life happens, Susan. We continue in our darkness for years. And you said you don't know how you did it. And that's usually the response everyone always says. I don't know how I did it, but, there's this thing in us that just pushes and keep pushing and keep pushing. And that's how we did it. I was a single dad with four boys, and I didn't know how I did it. People ask me, how did you do it? I have no idea. I can't go back and tell you how I did it, but we are here. They're grown men and they're traveling all over and they're healthy and stuff like that. But I don't know. So here we are just going through life. I don't know. How old were you, Susan, when it crashed? When enough was enough, when you got to a place where you couldn't hold on anymore. There is no faking it. The mind is dark. Your behavior is just everything, and you are about to crash and burn, and you know it, and you're here. What did that look like for you when you got to that space? And what happened when you got there?
Well, I married that boyfriend. We had 2 kids. I'm now in my 30. I was 31, something like that, and I was working as a hairdresser. We had moved to Colorado. We had decided I had decided that I needed to leave all of that behind in California, and my mindset was if I leave it there, it won't follow me. Geographically, I'm just gonna leave it in California, go to Colorado, nobody knows me, nobody knows my backstory, I don't have to talk about it, I don't have to tell anybody, that kinda thing. And I was working as a hairdresser, we moved here in '97. And the day of April 20th of 1999, I was working at a salon that was very close to Littleton, Colorado. And I had taken a break from a client and walked into the back room, and a colleague had turned on the TV, and up popped all of the live coverage of the Columbine shootings. And as I was standing there looking at the TV set, I had a visceral reaction. I started having flashbacks of the night that my dad was killed by seeing the school and the ambulance and the police cars and all the things that I had seen that night. And I knew that I was starting to have a panic attack. I could feel a tingling in my fingers starting, and I turned white as a ghost. And my colleague walked in and looked at me and said, "What is going on with you?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't know why I'm having this. I have no idea what's happening to me." And I had not told her my story, so she had no idea. I remember I was told I was gonna be fine for the rest of my life, so I didn't have a clue either. And My colleague walked out of the room, and I just said to myself, okay, it's time for that mask. I'm going to put it on. I'm going to go out. I'm going to finish my day. This isn't going to affect me. I'm going to be fine tomorrow. This is going to go away. I don't have any kids at that school. I have no connection to that school. I'm going to be fine. Fine. That lovely word. And I went out, finished my day. Everyone around me was totally upset, all the emotions, being angry, being sad, all of it. And I was stoic. I finished my day like this doesn't affect me. And I walked out the door to go home, and all of it came flooding back, all of it. And I, I, I started to spiral. I stopped sleeping. Suicidal ideation creeped back in. I was literally having a fight in my head between I didn't want to feel this way anymore, and you have 2 babies at home that need their mom. And I just struggled for a couple of days, just really bad. And my smart husband recognized it.
Yeah.
And he met me at the door one day and he said, Susan, you have 2 choices. Either you go get help today or I'm putting you in a hospital. And so I was smacked in the face
Yeah.
with that. And at the time I was so scared that this wasn't going to end well. And I put up that white flag and I said, I give up. Okay, I'll go. And I went to a physician. Initially, he put me on antidepressants because that's what they do.
Yep.
And then he handed me a business card and he said, I want you to make an appointment with this therapist. And I literally laughed in his face. And I said, I tried this 14 years ago and it didn't work. So what makes you think it's going to happen this time? And he said, you don't have a choice. So I made an appointment with this woman and I saw that she specialized in trauma. So when I sat with her for the first 3 minutes, I knew it was different. She was asking me all the questions that I had wished had been asked many, many years ago. And I felt like she was my safe space and that I could be vulnerable with her. And so I told her what I went through at 17 and what I was currently dealing with. And she looked me in the face and she said, Susan, everything you've gone through since you were 17 is normal because you have PTSD. And I looked at her kind of funny. I said, I don't get it. I'm not in the military. I didn't go to war. What are you talking about? And she said, anyone who goes through any kind of trauma can experience PTSD. But what you need to understand is that it's not something that goes away. It's something you learn to manage. And in that moment, that very, very moment, I felt, oh my God, I'm not crazy and I can heal from this. And here is my person, that adult, that person that I've always needed all these years to help me navigate this. And so I had so much hope in that moment. And I was so grateful that the universe brought me to this woman because I knew that I was going to be able to heal and
Yeah.
with
One of the
her.
principles I remember reading says, God will give you the desires of your heart. And here's this young 17-year-old girl. Her desire was, I need someone to ask me the right questions. And it usually takes time for that because, you have to work in situations, stuff has to come up. Columbine had to come up
Yeah.
to bring you to this woman. And so everything will be used to get you your desired outcome when it's deep and it's from your soul, from deep there in that part of you. And so when this manifested and you began to heal as she began to ask those questions to locate you where you were and began to excavate all of those things that were residing within you. I know being in the space of a narcissist, there is much there as well that you are discovering from that, along with the trauma from the dad's death and all the different pieces. Susan, as you're excavating all of that and you began to deal with it, what tools did you bring into your life to help you, quote unquote, deal with it, to help you to manage it?
Yeah. Well, she knew I was a hot mess.
Yeah,
She knew that I was dealing with a lot of different things all at the same time. And so she basically wanted to really hone in on the one thing at that very moment that I was struggling with the most. And that was sleep. Because every time I would it would get dark outside, I'd start to get anxious. And then as I'd lay in my bed and I would close my eyes and go back to that night, and then it would send me into this dark space. So I would just stay up, and that was making the anxiety because my nervous system was all kinds out of whack and my depression worse. And so she said, okay, we're going to address that first and foremost. And I said, okay. And she said, have you ever journaled before? And I kind of looked at her sideways and I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, journaling can be in different ways. So you can do it writing, you can do art, or some people do music to journal their feelings out. And I said, well, no. And I write. So she said, great. Take a pad of paper and a pen, put it by your bed. And tonight, before you go to bed, I want you to take everything that's swirling around in your head and put it on that paper. And she said, just write. Don't worry about punctuation and spelling. And, you know, she gasped, she grasped that I was a people pleaser. So
yeah,
she's like, no spelling, no punctuation. It doesn't even have to make sense, Susan. Just put it on the paper. And I was like so skeptical about this, but I was like, all right, if this is what you want me to do, I'll do it. And that night I did exactly what she told me to do. And I got a couple of hours of sleep. And the next night I got a couple more hours of sleep. And by the third night, I was sleeping like a baby. I woke up and the next morning going, what just happened? Right. And I didn't want to admit it. So when I went back in a week, she said, how did it go? I said, well, I've been sleeping for 4 days. So clearly it worked. And she said, great, keep doing it. And it's something that I continue to do. And then we went into the panic attacks and things like that. And she taught me breath work and breathing techniques. The one thing I could say about this therapist is she was young and she was very much ahead of her time. She would do outside of your normal clinical things to help me and guide me and help me to learn to regulate my nervous system, which I use today to help others regulate their nervous system. But it was a pattern of just dealing with the things that would come up as they would come up. And it got to the big dog. It didn't happen until many, many years later where I did the EMDR therapies, that cognitive therapy. I wish in hindsight I should have done more sessions, but EMDR can be a little intimidating. But I will tell you that it did a lot for me. And it also brought out things in me that I didn't want to recognize, which was I'm very intuitive as well. So
yeah.
yeah, it was a journey with her, and I was just so grateful that for the first time in my life that I was starting to feel better and I had these tools. So when things came up, I knew what to do for myself and I knew that I would be able to bring myself out of that emotional state. And that was powerful for me.
And one of the things that you'd mentioned as a young individual, and when you mentioned it, I told you I'm writing this book on narcissism, looking at different personalities that deal with narcissists. And your empath style showed up when you were a little kid, where you were rebellious against them and knew the cost of it, but you were still there pushing back. And you were You weren't 100% aware of what that all meant. But as you got older and you were going through different therapies and stuff like that, you began to tap into what that all meant and who that individual is. And when that individual awakes, it can be one of the most terrifying things that a narcissist will ever see in their life is an empath who knows everything they're doing and staring at them, looking at them, and they know it, they recognize it, and it's like fearfulness that drops in their eyes, and they just cannot deal with that empath when they had enough and said, okay, shut down, showtime. And that's when they start panicking. So here you are, you're healing, you're gaining all your insights, you're journaling, you're doing the breath work. Those are powerful tools that are necessary. I tell people breath work is the bridge to the supernatural. It takes you there. Journaling is one way by which you can empty the self and allow new things to come in and new ideas, new perceptions, and so forth. And as you begin to empty yourself, I'm sure that emptying leads you to this book
Oh,
because
yeah.
as you are, talk to me about the journaling that led you to the book. And I love the title, The Other Side of the Gun. I think it's a great title, by the way. And I want to know, how did you come up with that title? But also, as you're doing the journaling, how did it navigate it to that book?
Well, the book, I had always kind of wanted to do a book, but I had no idea how to do it. And so that was very intimidating to me. But when I turned 50 years old, I drew a line in the sand and I said, this thing has to happen. And I think my dad was kicking me in the rear end to do it as well.
Yeah.
But I was also mentally in a state of mind where I was safe. That in reliving the experiences and feeling the emotions and getting that all on paper
Mm-hmm.
was going to be a journey in itself. And it was. But I had the tools to bring me back if I started to spiral or if I started to
Yeah.
feel a little out of control. And so in writing the book, it was terrifying because I knew part of the reason I wrote it is because for so many years, other people had my story in their head.
Yeah.
And it was not who I was as a person. And so I wanted people to see who I really am. For what the other side was, there was so much pain and anger and sadness around my dad's death in the law enforcement community that I thought that if they heard my story, read my story and read that I'm healing from it, that it would give them a space to heal themselves. What came with that, though, is this fear of being 100% vulnerable out there,
Mm-hmm.
naked for the world to see, and there were a few fears. Like my relationship with my mom was still not healthy and it was teetering. And I thought, this book could either break us completely or it could open a conversation. With my husband and I have been together almost 40 years and we have been through hell and back. And so I was afraid it was going to bring up some old wounds for him. And the third was my safety because there were still men that were incarcerated. And I thought if I put myself out there again, there might be retaliation. And I just had to sit with this fear for a minute. And I remember clearly sitting in my office thinking, okay, what is the real reason why you're writing this book? And it came to me that there were people out there that needed to hear what I needed to hear many years ago, the hope and the healing, and that no matter what you go through in life, you can heal from it. You can take your power back from it. You can find forgiveness in it. All the things that I've learned to do in my journey, that others can do it, but they need to hear it. And so every time I had that fear come up, I just saw those faceless people out there that needed to hear my message and that had to know that they're not alone and that there are people out there. You can find your person, your professional, your person. that will help you and guide you in the way that you need that support. And it just allowed me to bulldoze right through those fears and
That's a
keep
beautiful
going.
story. Beautiful stories, Susan, because our our blessing is beyond that door, the door of fear and fearfulness. And when we push through that door and we enter into the other side, that's where the glory lies, if you will. And as you embark on the book and you're doing all the things to help you, grow and heal. Writing a book is a great way to heal. And you're healing. And as you're going through all of this stuff, you are now taking all of those principles that you have utilized in your life to help you, and you're now going to put it into a format that you are going to be able to help others. Talk to me about that process, because it is a process and you begin to look at things and change up and to fit your personality and bring it into a way where you feel comfortable, and so that you can stretch yourself, if you will, and still be relaxed and able to be functional. How did that process happen to you, and what did your process look like when you put it out? Because again, you're your first client, but I want to know when you put it out, and I want to know your first client after you brought it out. What did that look like when you came out?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a definite journey, that's for sure. When you read, especially during the editing part, when you continue to read your story over and over and over and over, even though I experienced it, I saw it in a different way. And this is where I was processing the relationship between my mother and I and realizing that this isn't something that happened when my dad died. This was something that happened many years prior
Mm-hmm.
to, where our dynamic totally changed when I became an independent young lady
Mm-hmm.
with my own thoughts, my own feelings, right? And I started to process that a lot more and seeing things so much clearer, and recognizing that. And um there were days where I was spent, like I had nothing left. And I, at the time, still am. I'm also a practicing realtor. And I was at a point where I was like, I would write the book. I would carve out time in my day to write the book. But there were times where I just didn't have anything left inside of me. Emotionally, I was completely drained. And on those days, I learned to give myself grace with no guilt. And I would tell my clients, not today. Like we can discuss things tomorrow. We can do things tomorrow. If you want to see houses, I'll line you up with someone to take you to see houses. But today is not happening because I
Yeah.
knew if I'm not 100%, I'm not going to give 100%. On those days, I would give myself grace and I would go do things that gave me joy or things that would change my state. Um, I would go outside. I would go for a walk. I would sit on my back porch because it's very naturey out there. And I would just put my feet in the grass. I would, just redirect my thinking. And I knew that the next day was a different day. And so I just needed to be present where I was, but at the same time, pull myself out of that emotional state. And I did. And the reason I did is because I had the tools, I knew what to do for myself in that moment. But that too was a learning,
Yeah.
even when you're giving yourself grace, there's always that little bit of guilt
Uh-huh.
in there, especially, when you're supposed to be adulting. But I had to learn to just, no, you need this time. You need this time to recalibrate so that you can do your job at a high level tomorrow and be there for the people that you need to be there for tomorrow. And so that's what I did.
And when you found your way, if you will, and you are now dealing with a client, someone outside of you. How were you able to help them? What was the process that you put them?
Generally, what happens is the people that I have met, they will use the book to open a conversation. And so the conversations that I've had with people in meeting them, once they've kind of read a little bit of the book, it opens a conversation about healing and about trauma. And because my dad, and this is what I've gleaned from my dad, because my dad was a very present person, I have learned to be a present person. And my goal is to give them a safe space. My goal is to show them my vulnerability so that it gives them a safe space to show me theirs. So the conversations that I've had with people have been incredible because I have been able to show them I can be vulnerable, you can be vulnerable with no judgment. Um, and so it's allowed me to have some incredible conversations with people that are life-changing conversations for them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is awesome. And all you guys are listening to our conversation. We're going to provide all of Susan's information so you can get to her. And Susan, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Thanks for having me.
It's been an honor. Susan.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.